I found my wedding photo in the trash can, covered in coffee grounds and eggshells. My hands trembled as I pulled it out, staring at the smiling faces of two young people who had no idea what 53 years of marriage would bring. That's when I knew my daughter-in-law had crossed a line she could never uncross. My name is Margaret, and I'm 74 years old. For most of my life, I thought I understood what family meant. I thought loyalty was built into the foundation of blood and marriage, that respect came naturally when you opened your home and your heart. I was wrong about so many things, but I was right about one. Some secrets are powerful enough to change everything. It started 6 months ago when my son Daniel brought home his new wife, Vanessa. They'd been dating for only 8 months before getting engaged, and the wedding happened so fast it made my head spin. Daniel was 42, divorced once already, and I think he was desperate to prove he could make it work this time. His first marriage had ended badly. His ex-wife Claire had left him for a colleague, and the divorce had taken 2 years of bitter negotiations. I'd watched my son go through that darkness, seen him question everything about himself, and it had nearly broken him. When he met Vanessa, I'd hoped she would be the balm his wounded heart needed. Vanessa was 35, beautiful in that polished way that makes you feel a little inadequate, with perfectly highlighted hair and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She had the kind of beauty that required maintenance, the kind that came from expensive salons and designer clothes and a lifestyle I couldn't begin to understand. My late husband Robert would have called her calculated. I tried to call her daughter. From the very beginning, Vanessa made it clear she had plans for Daniel's life, and I wasn't part of them. She'd grown up wealthy in Connecticut, the only child of a corporate lawyer and a former model. She'd attended private schools where tuition cost more than most people's annual salary, spent summers in the Hamptons with people whose names appeared in society columns, and had what she called standards about how life should be lived. I'd grown up in a 2-bedroom house in Ohio with 4 siblings, sharing a bathroom and wearing hand-me-downs until I was 16. My idea of luxury was getting new shoes that weren't my sister's cast-offs, and my summers were spent helping my mother can vegetables from our garden. We were from different worlds, different universes really, but I tried. God knows I tried. The first month after the wedding, I bit my tongue when she redecorated Daniel's house, erasing every trace of his first marriage and somehow every photo of his childhood too. She hired an interior designer and spent what I'm sure was a small fortune transforming his comfortable, lived-in home into something that looked like it belonged in an architecture magazine. All neutral colors and clean lines and furniture that looked too expensive to actually sit on. The photo of Daniel graduating medical school, gone. The picture of him and his college friends on a fishing trip, gone. The small painting I'd given him when he bought the house, gone. Everything that made it Daniel's home disappeared, replaced by Vanessa's vision of what their life should look like. I smiled when she casually mentioned that Sunday dinners at my place were quaint but not really our scene. She'd said it so sweetly, with that apologetic little laugh, as if she were doing me a favor by being honest. Robert and I had hosted Sunday dinners for 30 years, a tradition I'd continued even after his death. It was just pot roast and mashed potatoes, nothing fancy, but it was family time. It was connection. But apparently, connection wasn't Vanessa's style. I even nodded politely when she suggested I might be more comfortable if I called before visiting, even though I'd had a key to my son's house for 20 years. "It's not that you're not welcome, Margaret," she'd said, touching my arm in that condescending way some people have. "It's just that Daniel and I are newlyweds, and we need our privacy. I'm sure you understand." The way she said it made me feel like I was the one being unreasonable, like I was some overbearing mother who couldn't cut the apron strings. But the wedding photo, that was different. That was sacred. That was war. Robert and I had married on a crisp October morning in 1972, in a small Baptist church on the edge of town. The ceremony had cost less than most people spend on their rehearsal dinners today. My dress was borrowed from my cousin Linda, who was 2 sizes bigger than me, so my mother had spent 3 evenings taking it in by hand, her fingers working by lamplight after she got home from her shift at the textile factory. The flowers were from my mother's garden, dahlias and chrysanthemums that she'd been nurturing all summer, arranged in mason jars because we couldn't afford a florist. Our rings were simple gold bands that Robert had saved 6 months to afford, working double shifts at the steel mill and skipping lunches to put away every penny he could. We'd had 27 people at our wedding. 27 people who loved us, who brought covered dishes for the reception in the church basement, who danced to records played on someone's portable record player. There was no photographer. My Uncle Harold had taken pictures with his Kodak camera, and most of them were slightly out of focus or poorly lit. But there was one, just one, that captured everything. Robert and me standing on the church steps, me in my borrowed dress with my mother's flowers, him in the only suit he owned, both of us grinning like we'd just won the lottery. Because in a way we had. We'd found each other. That photo had lived on various mantels and walls for 53 years. It had survived 3 moves, 2 kids, countless arguments and reconciliations, and all the beautiful mundane chaos of building a life together. Robert had been gone for 3 years now, taken by a heart attack that came without warning one Tuesday afternoon while he was working in the garden. One moment he was planting tomatoes, planning for a harvest he'd never see, and the next he was gone. That photo was one of the few things I had left that captured the pure, uncomplicated joy of that day. Before we knew about bills and sick children, and all the little heartbreaks that come with building a life together. I'd placed it on the mantel in Daniel's living room during a visit 3 weeks after his wedding, thinking it would be nice for him to see his parents young and happy. It was a small frame, nothing ostentatious, just 5 by 7 inches of memory. Just a reminder that real love existed, that it was possible to stand beside someone for decades and mean every word of the vows you'd spoken. And Vanessa had thrown it away like garbage. Like it was nothing. Like 53 years of marriage was worth less than the coffee grounds she'd dumped on top of it. I found it on a Thursday morning in late September. The leaves were just starting to turn, that first hint of gold creeping into the green, and there was a crispness in the air that reminded me of the morning Robert and I got married. I'd stopped by Daniel's house to drop off some of his favorite cookies, the chocolate chip ones with walnuts that I'd been making since he was 7 years old. It was a small thing, just a gesture to remind him I was thinking of him, that I loved him even though his new wife had made it clear I was no longer quite as welcome as I used to be. The house was empty, both of them at work. Daniel was doing a rotation at the hospital, probably wouldn't be home until late, and Vanessa worked at a marketing firm downtown, the kind of job where everyone was always having important meetings and power lunches. I used my key, the one I'd had for 20 years, the one Vanessa hadn't quite managed to ask for back yet. I was putting the cookies in the kitchen, arranging them on a plate so they'd look nice when Daniel got home, when I saw the corner of a gold frame peeking out from the trash can. Something about it caught my eye. Maybe it was the color, that particular shade of gold that I recognized. Maybe it was intuition, that sixth sense that mothers develop about things that concern their children. Whatever it was, I walked over to that trash can and looked inside, and my whole world shifted. There, buried under coffee grounds and eggshells and what looked like the remains of an expensive takeout meal, was my wedding photo. The glass was cracked right down the middle, a jagged line that split Robert's face from mine. There was a coffee stain across Robert's face, dark and spreading, obscuring his smile. And the frame itself was bent, as if someone had deliberately twisted it before shoving it deep into the garbage. This wasn't an accident. You don't accidentally break a frame and bury it under garbage. You don't accidentally pour coffee on a photo and then cover it with trash. This was intentional. This was a message. This was Vanessa telling me, in the clearest possible way, that my past, Robert's memory, our history, had no place in her carefully curated life. I stood there in that pristine kitchen with its granite countertops and stainless steel appliances, holding a piece of my history, and something inside me shifted. It was like a lock clicking open, or maybe a door closing. For 6 months I'd been shrinking myself, making myself smaller, apologizing for existing, trying to fit into the tiny space Vanessa had allocated for me in my son's life. I'd convinced myself that keeping the peace was more important than keeping my dignity. I told myself that Daniel's happiness mattered more than my hurt feelings. But this was different. This wasn't about hurt feelings or wounded pride. This was about respect. This was about honoring what was sacred. And if Vanessa thought she could erase Robert's memory, erase 53 years of real marriage, without consequence, she was about to learn something important about underestimating a woman who'd survived 7 decades of life. I was done convincing myself of anything. I was done shrinking. I was done being quiet. I carefully cleaned the photo as best I could, wiping away the coffee grounds and eggshells with paper towels, trying not to let my tears fall on the already damaged picture. I wrapped it in a clean kitchen towel and took it home, And then I did something I'm not proud of, something the old Margaret would never have done. I started paying attention. Really paying attention. The kind of attention that goes beyond surface politeness into something deeper, more watchful. Because people who throw away other people's precious memories usually have something precious they're hiding themselves. People who show that level of casual cruelty, who can discard something sacred without a second thought, are usually protecting their own secrets. And I was going to find out what Vanessa's secrets were. If you're liking this story so far, hit that like button. Trust me, you're not going to believe where this goes. Over the next few weeks, I became someone I barely recognized. I started showing up at Daniel's house more often, always with an excuse, always with a reason. Dropping off food, returning something I'd borrowed, asking to borrow something myself. I became invisible in the way that older women often are, especially to younger women like Vanessa who see anyone over 60 as essentially irrelevant. She'd barely acknowledge me, would wave vaguely in my direction before returning to her phone or her laptop or whatever was more important than basic courtesy. And while she ignored me, I watched. I listened. I paid attention in ways I never had before. I noticed how Vanessa's phone was always face down on the table, how she'd immediately flip it over if it was face up when someone walked into the room. I noticed how she stepped into another room to take certain calls, her voice dropping to a murmur, sometimes even going outside to finish the conversation. I noticed how she'd mentioned several times that she had to visit her sick aunt in Boston for the weekend, always on alternate Fridays, always staying through Saturday afternoon. I noticed how she controlled every aspect of Daniel's social life with surgical precision. His old college roommate called wanting to get together. Vanessa would say they had plans even when I knew they didn't. His friends from medical school suggested a guy's weekend. Vanessa would suddenly plan a romantic getaway for the same dates. His divorced friend Mark wanted to come by for a beer. Vanessa would make sure she was home, inserting herself into the visit until Mark got uncomfortable and left early. She was systematically cutting him off from everyone who'd known him before her, isolating him in a way that seemed loving on the surface but was actually about control. I'd seen this pattern before, in my friend Patricia's daughter's marriage. The slow erosion of connections, the gradual narrowing of the world until there was only the marriage, only the spouse, only the isolation. And I noticed the shoes. God, I noticed the shoes. It was such a small thing, really the kind of detail most people would overlook. But I'd spent 53 years noticing small details, because that's what you do when you love someone. You pay attention. You see patterns. You notice when something doesn't fit. Vanessa had expensive taste in everything, but she was particularly obsessive about shoes. She had an entire walk-in closet dedicated to them, organized by color and designer, each pair in its own clear box with a Polaroid photo on the front showing what they looked like. Christian Louboutin, Manolo Blahnik, Jimmy Choo, Valentino, Prada. She'd given me a tour once, early in the marriage, barely concealing her pride at the collection that probably cost more than my car. She'd told me she never wore the same pair more than once a week, that she had them professionally cleaned and maintained, that they were an investment. Shoes say everything about a woman, she'd told me, running her hand along the rows of boxes like a curator in a museum. They're not just accessories. They're statements of who you are, and what you deserve. I'd nodded politely, thinking about the 3 pairs of sensible shoes I owned, the ones I rotated through depending on whether I needed to walk a lot or stand for hours or attend something that required looking nice. The idea of spending $600 on a single pair of shoes was so foreign to me it might as well have been a different language. But during one of my now rare visits about 4 weeks after I found the photo, I'd seen something odd. I was heading back to my car, arms full of empty containers from food I brought over, when I noticed Vanessa's white Mercedes in the driveway. The back seat was slightly messy, unusual for her since she normally kept her car immaculate. And there, barely visible under a black jacket, was a pair of shoes. I wouldn't have thought anything of it except for one detail. They were muddy. Not just dusty or slightly dirty, but actually muddy, with dark soil caked on the heels and sides. The distinctive red soles marked them as Louboutins, probably $500 or $600 at minimum, and they were shoved in a plastic grocery bag, hidden under that jacket, treated like garbage. This was wrong. Fundamentally wrong for someone like Vanessa, who treated her shoes like religious artifacts. She would never leave expensive shoes dirty in her car, Certainly not hidden in a plastic bag like she was ashamed of them or didn't want anyone to see them. I filed it away in my mind, this small inconsistency, and kept watching. The next week, there was another pair in the same condition. Different shoes, same treatment. Hidden, dirty, disposable. And the week after that, another pair. It was like she was maintaining two separate lives, two separate versions of herself, and these shoes were artifacts from the version she didn't want anyone to see. I couldn't figure it out until I remembered something my friend Patricia had told me about her granddaughter Emma. The girl had been leading a double life, keeping a whole separate wardrobe at her boyfriend's apartment, so her strict parents wouldn't know she was essentially living with him. She'd wear one outfit when she left home, something her parents would approve of, and change into another at his place, her real clothes, the ones that reflected who she actually was. She was code-switching between identities, being whoever she needed to be for each audience. That's when the pieces started clicking together in my mind. The alternate Friday trips to Boston, the phone calls taken in private, the systematic isolation of Daniel from his friends, the shoes that were hidden and dirty and treated like they didn't matter. Vanessa was living a double life. She had to be. Nothing else made sense. But I needed proof. I needed to be absolutely certain before I said anything to Daniel, because I knew how it would sound. The bitter mother-in-law who couldn't accept her son's new marriage, who was making up stories because she was jealous or controlling or unable to let go. I'd seen enough daytime television to know how that narrative played out, and I wasn't going to let Vanessa paint me as some kind of villainous mother figure from a soap opera. So I started following her. I'm not proud of this. I'm 74 years old, and I spent weeks following my daughter-in-law like I was some kind of private investigator. But I told myself I was protecting my son. I told myself that a mother's duty doesn't end just because her child is an adult. I told myself that if I was wrong, if there was an innocent explanation, then no harm done. But if I was right, then Daniel deserved to know the truth before he got hurt even worse than he'd been hurt by his first wife. The first time I followed her was on a Friday in early October. I'd called Daniel's office and confirmed he was doing a double shift at the hospital, wouldn't be home until past midnight. Then I'd parked my old Honda 3 blocks from his house and waited. Around 9 in the morning, Vanessa came out with a small overnight bag. The expensive leather kind that probably cost $1,000. She was dressed casually but expensively, designer jeans and a silk blouse, her hair perfect as always. She put the bag in her trunk, climbed into her white Mercedes and drove off. I followed her, staying far enough back that she wouldn't notice me but close enough that I wouldn't lose her in traffic. My heart was hammering so hard I thought I might have a heart attack right there on the highway. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel. I kept thinking about Robert, wondering what he would say about what I was doing. Would he approve? Would he tell me to stop, to mind my own business, to let Daniel handle his own life? But I also knew that Robert had never hesitated to protect his family. When Daniel was 10 and being bullied at school, Robert had gone to the school every single day until they addressed it. When our daughter Sarah was in an abusive relationship in her 20s, Robert had driven 6 hours to bring her home. No questions asked. He'd always said that love without action was just sentiment, and sentiment didn't protect anyone. So I followed Vanessa, telling myself I was acting out of love, not spite. I was protecting, not meddling. I was doing what needed to be done. She didn't drive toward Boston. Not even close. She took the highway going south, the opposite direction from where she'd claimed her sick aunt lived. She drove for about 40 minutes, eventually exiting into a town called Riverside, an affluent suburb full of new apartment complexes and trendy restaurants and coffee shops with names like Been There, Done That. It was the kind of place where young professionals lived, the kind of place with rooftop pools and fitness centers and wine bars on every corner. Vanessa pulled into a luxury apartment complex called the Meridian. I drove past her, circled the block, and parked in a spot 3 rows away where I could see her car, but she was unlikely to notice me. I slouched down in my seat, feeling ridiculous and terrified and absolutely certain that I was about to discover something I couldn't unknow. I watched her get out of her car, pull that expensive overnight bag from the trunk, and walk confidently toward a first-floor apartment. She didn't look around, didn't seem nervous or furtive. She walked like she belonged there, like she'd done this 100 times before. She used a key to open the door and disappeared inside. I sat there in my car for about an hour, my mind racing through possibilities. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe she was house-sitting for a friend. Maybe her aunt didn't live in Boston but here. And she'd lied about the location for some reason that would make perfect sense when explained. Maybe I was a paranoid old woman seeing conspiracies where there were none. Then a man came out of the same apartment to put something in the dumpster. He was probably in his late 30s, attractive in that generic way of men who spend too much time at the gym and too much money on their wardrobes. He wore expensive casual clothes, designer jeans and a fitted t-shirt that showed off his build. He looked around the parking lot with the casual possessiveness of someone surveying his territory, someone who lived here and knew his domain. He stood there for a moment, checking his phone, then tossed something into the dumpster and headed back inside. He went into the same apartment Vanessa had entered, the same door, the same space. I sat there until dark, watching the warm light in the windows, seeing shadows move back and forth. At one point, around 6 in the evening, I saw them through the sheer curtains. They were in what looked like the living room, standing close together, and the way he touched her lower back was intimate. Not friendly, not casual, intimate. The kind of touch that speaks of familiarity, of routine, of relationship. She emerged Saturday afternoon around 2, wearing different clothes than she'd arrived in. She carried the same bag, now presumably full of the clothes she'd changed out of, and she looked relaxed, happy even. She drove to a gas station about 3 miles away, went into the bathroom with a different bag, and came out 15 minutes later looking like the Vanessa that Daniel knew. Hair perfect, makeup impeccable, designer outfit, every inch the successful marketing executive playing the role of devoted wife. I watched this transformation, and something hardened in my chest. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't an innocent friendship. This was practiced, routine, systematic. This was a woman who'd perfected the art of being two different people. I followed her 3 more times over the next 6 weeks, documenting everything, making sure I wasn't crazy or jumping to conclusions or seeing patterns that didn't exist. Same routine every time, like clockwork. Leave Friday morning, arrive at the apartment in Riverside, spend the night, leave Saturday afternoon. Stop at the gas station, transform back into Daniel's wife. Drive home to the life she'd carefully constructed. Sometimes she'd stay overnight, sometimes just a few hours. Once I saw them kiss in the parking lot before she left, and it was the kind of kiss that tells you everything you need to know about what's really happening. It wasn't a friendly peck or an affectionate goodbye. It was hungry, passionate, the kind of kiss that comes from people who can't get enough of each other. I took photos on my phone, dozens of them. Her arriving, her leaving, the man coming and going. Timestamps, dates, locations. I documented everything like I was building a legal case because in a way I was, but I didn't tell Daniel. Not yet. Because I'd learned something important over 7 decades of life. Information is power, but timing is everything. If I went to him with just suspicions and a few photos, she could explain it away, make me look paranoid, and drive an even bigger wedge between us. I needed more than suspicions. I needed absolute proof. I needed evidence that even Vanessa's polished lies couldn't contradict. So I hired a private investigator. His name was Marcus Chan. A sharp man in his 50s who came highly recommended by Patricia's son, who'd used him during his own messy divorce. Marcus had kind eyes but a serious demeanor, and he listened to my story without judgment, taking notes and asking questions that showed he knew exactly what he was doing. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said when I finished, "I have to ask, are you prepared for what I might find? Sometimes these investigations reveal things that are difficult to accept." "Mr. Chan," I replied, "I buried my husband 3 years ago after watching him die in my arms. I raised 2 children through economic recessions and personal crises. I've lived through more difficult things than most people can imagine. Whatever you find, I can handle it. What I can't handle is watching my son be used and manipulated while I stand by and do nothing." He nodded, understanding. "I'll need 2 weeks, maybe 3. I'll need to verify everything, get clear documentation, establish patterns. If there's something to find, I'll find it." Marcus was thorough, discreet, and expensive, but worth every penny. Within 3 weeks, he had everything I needed and more. Photos, video, dates, times, and most importantly, the man's identity and the full extent of the deception. His name was Trevor Hastings, and he was Vanessa's ex-boyfriend. They dated for 6 years before she met Daniel, living together for the last 4 of those years in an apartment across town. According to Marcus's research, which included interviews with Trevor's neighbors and friends, they'd never really broken up. There'd been no dramatic fight, no painful separation. One day Vanessa had simply moved out, telling Trevor she needed space to figure things out, and 2 months later, she'd met Daniel at a charity fundraiser his hospital was sponsoring. Marcus had managed to access Trevor's social media through connections he had, and the timeline was damning. Vanessa appeared in photos on Trevor's private accounts throughout her entire relationship with Daniel. At restaurants, at the apartment, on weekend trips. She was living 2 complete lives, maintaining 2 full relationships, code-switching between identities with practiced ease. Trevor was a personal trainer at an upscale gym, good-looking and charming, but without real financial prospects. He drove a leased BMW that was probably costing him more than he could afford, lived in an apartment that was definitely beyond his means, and according to Marcus's financial investigation, was carrying significant credit card debt. He was the kind of guy who looked successful but was actually barely keeping his head above water. Daniel, on the other hand, was a successful cardiovascular surgeon with a very comfortable net worth, a growing practice, excellent reputation, and significant assets. He'd invested wisely, saved consistently, and despite his expensive divorce from Claire, had emerged financially stable with a bright future ahead. Vanessa hadn't chosen my son because she loved him. She'd chosen him because he was the better investment, the smarter long-term strategy, the more secure future. And she was keeping Trevor on the side because he gave her something Daniel apparently couldn't. Whatever that intangible thing is that makes someone willing to risk everything they've carefully built. Passion, maybe. Or just the thrill of getting away with it. Marcus also discovered something else, something that made my blood run even colder. Through a contact who worked at Vanessa's marketing firm, he'd learned that Vanessa had been telling her close friends in confidence that the marriage to Daniel was temporary. She'd apparently said she was building security, but had no intention of staying married long-term. She was waiting for something specific, positioning herself for maximum benefit when she decided to leave. Marcus suspected it had to do with Daniel's medical practice. He'd recently been offered a partnership in a prestigious cardiology group, a position that would significantly increase his income, provide substantial benefits, and secure his professional reputation for decades to come. The paperwork was set to finalize in 4 months, right around the time Daniel and Vanessa would hit their 2-year anniversary, the point at which divorce settlements become significantly more favorable to the spouse in many states. She was playing a long game, and my son was just a chess piece, a means to an end, a stepping stone to the life she felt entitled to. When Marcus presented me with his final report, a comprehensive document with photos, timelines, financial analysis, and witness statements, I sat in my kitchen and cried. Not just for Daniel, though God knows my heart broke for him, but for Robert too, for the family we'd built, for the values we tried to instill in our children. We taught them to trust, to love openly, to believe in the goodness of people. And here was proof that sometimes that goodness is just a performance, a role played by people who see relationships as transactions. I kept all of this to myself for another 2 weeks, carrying the weight of it like a stone in my chest. I watched Vanessa perform her role as the devoted wife, sitting next to Daniel at a hospital fundraiser, her hand on his arm, smiling at his colleagues. I saw Daniel light up whenever she walked into a room, saw him look at her with genuine love and gratitude, believing he'd finally found his person after the pain of his first marriage. It was torture, like watching someone you love walk toward a cliff in the dark, and you're screaming at them to stop, to look, to see the danger, but they can't hear you. They just keep walking, smiling, believing everything is beautiful, while you know they're about to fall. But I waited, because I needed one more thing to make this perfect. I needed the right moment, the right setting, the right opportunity to expose everything in a way that Vanessa couldn't talk her way out of or explain away or spin into some story where I was the villain and she was the victim. The opportunity came at Daniel's 43rd birthday party in late November. Vanessa had insisted on hosting it at their house, calling me 3 weeks before to inform me of the date, the time, and the guest list I wasn't consulted on. She'd hired caterers, bartenders, even a valet service for the cars. She'd transformed their backyard into something resembling a magazine spread, with string lights and heating lamps and designer furniture borrowed from some rental company. "It's going to be absolutely perfect," she told me on the phone, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "Daniel deserves a celebration that reflects his status, his achievements. Something elegant and sophisticated. The subtext was clear. Something unlike the simple, homey celebrations I provided for 42 previous birthdays. Something that showed everyone exactly what kind of life Vanessa had created for him. She'd specifically told me I could invite 2 friends at most because space was limited, even though their house had 6 bedrooms and a backyard that could hold 100 people comfortably. The guest list was mostly Daniel's colleagues from the hospital, Vanessa's friends from her marketing firm, and various people I suspected Daniel barely knew. His old college friends hadn't been invited. His divorced buddy Mark hadn't made the list. Even his sister Sarah, my daughter, had been given some excuse about why she couldn't come. It was Vanessa's party, celebrating Vanessa's version of who Daniel should be, and I wasn't even angry about it anymore. I was just cold, calculating, waiting for my moment. I arrived early, as I'd told Vanessa I would, ostensibly to help set up. She'd made it clear my help wasn't needed or wanted, but I insisted, and she couldn't find a polite way to refuse without looking like a terrible daughter-in-law. I watched her direct the caterers, the bartenders, the decorators, orchestrating everything with the precision of a military operation. She was in her element, controlling every detail, ensuring that the image presented to the world was exactly what she wanted it to be. As I walked through the house, I saw she'd redecorated again. Everything was even more modern and cold than before, all sharp angles and neutral colors and furniture that looked like art installations rather than things people actually used. There wasn't a single photo of Daniel's family anywhere. No pictures of him as a child, no photos of Robert and me, nothing that suggested he had a history before Vanessa entered his life. She'd erased us completely, painting over our existence like we were mistakes that needed to be corrected. But there was a new photo on the mantel, a massive professional portrait of Daniel and Vanessa in formal wear, looking like they belonged in a luxury magazine or an advertisement for expensive watches. It was beautiful, technically perfect, and completely soulless. They looked like models playing the role of a successful couple, not like 2 people who actually loved each other. And it was sitting exactly where my wedding photo had been, in the same spot, almost the same size frame. The message was clear. Vanessa's version of marriage, polished and perfect and profitable, had replaced the messy, real, deeply imperfect but genuine marriage Robert and I had shared. That's when I made my final decision about exactly how this evening was going to unfold. The party was in full swing by 7 o'clock, the house full of Daniel's colleagues and Vanessa's friends, everyone drinking expensive wine and eating tiny, overpriced hors d'oeuvres and pretending to have deep conversations about things that probably didn't matter. I dressed carefully for the occasion, wearing my best dress, a deep blue sheath that Robert had always loved, and the pearls he'd given me for our 30th anniversary. I'd done my hair and makeup with more care than usual, and I'd made sure I looked like someone who commanded respect, not someone who could be dismissed or overlooked. Daniel found me on the back patio around 7:30, stepping away from a cluster of his colleagues. For a moment, seeing him in his suit with his slightly nervous smile, I saw my little boy, the sweet child who used to bring me dandelions from the yard and call them flowers, who'd cried when his goldfish died and made me promise we'd give it a proper funeral in the backyard. The teenager who'd studied so hard to get into medical school, falling asleep at the kitchen table with his textbooks spread around him. The young man who'd called me crying after his first day of residency, overwhelmed by the responsibility of having people's lives in his hands. He hugged me tight and I could smell his cologne, the same brand Robert used to wear. "Thanks for coming, Mom," he said softly, his voice warm with genuine affection. "I know Vanessa can be particular about things, but it really means a lot that you're here." My heart broke a little. He was apologizing for his wife's behavior, making excuses, trying to smooth over tensions that shouldn't exist in a healthy family. He was already trained to manage her reactions, to anticipate her judgments, to make himself smaller to avoid conflict. "Sweetheart," I said, pulling back to look at him directly, "I need to talk to you about something important. Not here, not tonight, but soon. Very soon. Promise me you'll listen with an open mind." His expression shifted to concern, the doctor in him always alert to signs of trouble. "Is everything okay? Are you sick? Is it your heart?" "I'm fine, honey. I'm perfectly healthy." I touched his cheek the way I used to when he was small. "But there are some things you need to know. Important things about your marriage, about Vanessa. Things I wish I didn't have to tell you, but I can't keep them to myself anymore. Before he could respond, before he could ask the questions I saw forming in his eyes, Vanessa appeared at his elbow. Her hand landed on his arm with that possessive certainty, claiming him, marking territory. She glanced at me with that smile that never reached her eyes, the one I'd learned to recognize as a dismissal. Daniel, the Hendersons are leaving. You should say goodbye. Dr. Henderson is considering your practice for his referrals. She looked at me, her voice saccharine. Margaret, there's plenty of cake in the kitchen if you're hungry. Help yourself. She said it the way you'd speak to a child at an adult party, patronizing and dismissive, making it clear that while I was tolerated, I wasn't really part of the inner circle. And something in her tone, the casual cruelty of it, made my decision absolutely final. I was done being dismissed, done being erased, done watching this woman use my son while pretending to love him. Actually, Vanessa, I said, my voice calm and clear, I think I'll wait right here. I'd like to talk to you after the guests leave. Both of you. It's rather important. She looked irritated, opening her mouth to brush me off again, but Daniel intervened. Mom, of course. Whatever you need. After everyone's gone, we'll sit down and talk. Okay? Vanessa's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she managed to keep her smile in place. She pulled Daniel away toward the Hendersons, and I watched them go, knowing that in a few hours everything would change. Do you think my decision was right or wrong? Tell me in the comments, because what I did next changed everything, not just for Daniel and Vanessa, but for our entire family. I waited as the party wound down, as guests said their goodbyes and collected their coats and complimented Vanessa on her hosting skills. I waited as the caterers packed up their equipment and the bartenders closed down the bar. I waited until it was just family and a few of Daniel's closest colleagues, the ones who were staying for a more intimate celebration. Vanessa was in the kitchen with two of her girlfriends, women named Ashley and Morgan, who looked like they'd been manufactured in the same factory that produced Vanessa. Same highlighted hair, same designer clothes, same air of entitlement. They were laughing about something, drinking wine from crystal glasses, riding high on the success of the party. Daniel was on the back porch with his best friend from medical school, Tom, a kind man who'd been at our house for Sunday dinners more times than I could count. They were relaxing with beers, finally letting down their guard after hours of professional networking. I walked into the kitchen and set my purse on the counter with deliberate firmness. The three women looked up, their conversation dying mid-sentence. Vanessa, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins, could I talk to you for a moment? In private. She exchanged a glance with her friends, annoyed at the interruption. Can it wait, Margaret? We're kind of in the middle of catching up. No, I said, meeting her eyes directly. It can't wait. Unless you prefer to have this conversation in front of everyone, I'm happy to do it either way. Something in my tone, in the steel underneath my polite words, made her friends uncomfortable. Ashley mumbled something about needing to use the bathroom. Morgan suddenly remembered she had to make a phone call. They drifted toward the living room, leaving us alone. Vanessa crossed her arms, her expression shifting from annoyed to cold. What is this about, Margaret? I don't appreciate being pulled away from my own party. I pulled my phone from my purse and opened the folder Marcus had prepared. The one with dozens of photos, videos, timestamps, documents. It's about Trevor Hastings, I said quietly, watching her face. And the apartment in Riverside. And the fact that you've been living a double life for the entire duration of your marriage to my son. All the color drained from her face like someone had pulled a plug. Her carefully maintained composure cracked, and for the first time since I'd met her, Vanessa looked genuinely afraid. Her eyes darted to the phone in my hand, to the door, back to my face. I don't know what you think she started, but her voice lacked conviction. I have photos, I interrupted, my voice low but firm. Videos. Dates, times, receipts, witness statements. I have everything, Vanessa. I know you've been seeing Trevor Hastings every other Friday for the entire time you've been married to Daniel. I know you told your friends this marriage is temporary, that you're just building security. I know you're waiting for Daniel's partnership to come through before you file for divorce to maximize your settlement. I know you threw my wedding photo in the trash because you wanted to erase any reminder that real marriages actually mean something. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. I'd never seen her speechless before, never seen her without her polished veneer firmly in place. Here's what's going to happen, I continued, my voice still quiet but absolutely unyielding. You're going to walk out to that porch right now, and you're going to tell Daniel the truth. All of it. You're going to tell him about Trevor, about the apartment, about your plan to leave him once his partnership is finalized. And then you're going to pack a bag and leave this house tonight. You can't, she started, her voice shaking with rage and panic. You have no right. Or, I said, cutting her off, I will stand up in front of every single person still in this house, including Daniel's colleagues and your friends, and I will show them every photo, every piece of evidence Marcus Chan collected. I will make sure everyone Daniel knows, everyone you know, every person at your marketing firm and his hospital sees exactly who you really are. I will personally email this entire file to your boss, to Daniel's partners, to everyone in both of your professional networks. Your choice, Vanessa. We stood there in that kitchen, two women on opposite sides of a line neither of us could cross back over. The distance between us felt like miles, like we existed in different universes with completely incompatible rules. I could see her mind racing, calculating, trying to find a way out, looking for an angle she could work or a story she could sell. But there wasn't one. We both knew it. I had her cornered completely, caught in a trap of her own making, and there was no escape hatch, no clever excuse, no performance that would get her out of this. You bitter old bitch, she whispered, and the venom in her voice was real, the first genuine emotion I'd ever seen from her. You've been waiting for this, haven't you? Waiting for any chance to ruin this because you can't stand that someone else makes him happy, that someone else has his attention, that you're not the most important woman in his life anymore. I don't care if you think I'm bitter, I said calmly. I don't care what story you tell yourself to make yourself feel better about what you've done. I care about my son. And you don't love him, Vanessa. You're using him, and that ends tonight. Right now. She grabbed her phone from the counter with shaking hands, and for a moment I thought she might try to run, just grab her keys and flee into the night. But then her shoulders sagged in defeat. She knew that running would only make everything worse, that it would confirm every accusation without even the pretense of explanation. I need a few minutes, she said finally, her voice small and defeated in a way I'd never heard before, to figure out what to say. You have 5 minutes, I told her. And Vanessa? I want you to know something. I would have welcomed you into this family with open arms if you'd been real with him. I would have loved you like a daughter if you'd chosen Daniel for the right reasons, if you'd been genuine and honest. But you threw away any chance of that the same day you threw away my wedding photo. That photo represented 53 years of real love, of choosing the same person every single day even when it was hard, even when it wasn't fun or profitable or convenient. You'll never understand what that means, and that's the saddest part of all of this. She left the kitchen without another word, and I stood there alone, my hands trembling now that the confrontation was over. I'd done it. I'd actually done it. There was no going back now, no way to undo what I'd set in motion. In a few minutes, Daniel's world was going to shatter, and I was the one who'd be holding the hammer. I heard voices rising on the back porch 3 minutes later. Daniel's voice, confused and then angry. Vanessa's, defensive and then pleading, the words tumbling out in a rush. Tom's voice, trying to understand what was happening, then going quiet as the weight of the revelation sank in. The remaining guests started gathering their things, sensing that something terrible was happening, that the party had definitively ended in the worst possible way. I stayed in the kitchen, giving them privacy for this moment at least. I could hear Vanessa crying, her voice high and desperate, making promises and excuses and pleas for another chance. When Daniel finally came to find me, his face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed, his hands shaking. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Mom, he said, his voice breaking on the word. Mom, is it true? Do you really have proof of everything she said? I handed him my phone without a word, the folder already open. He sat down at the kitchen table, right where I'd sat so many times helping him with homework when he was young, and he scrolled through the photos, the videos, the timeline Marcus had constructed, the witness statements, the financial analysis, all of it. I watched my son's heartbreak in real time, watched him see his marriage, his future, his trust, his hope, all shatter into pieces. I watched him understand that the woman he'd chosen, the woman he'd believed in, The woman he'd opened his life to after the pain of his first divorce had never been real. She'd been a performance, a role, a calculated strategy. When he finished, he set the phone down carefully like it was made of glass. His hands were shaking. "How long have you known?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "About 6 weeks. Maybe closer to 7. I wanted to be absolutely certain before I said anything. I needed proof that would be undeniable, that couldn't be explained away or twisted into something else. She's been seeing him for over a year, Mom. The entire time we've been married. She was with him the weekend after our wedding." His voice cracked on the last word. "Our honeymoon was the only time she wasn't seeing him, and that's only because we were in Europe for 2 weeks." I sat down next to him and took his hand, the way I used to when he was small and needed comfort. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I'm so sorry you have to go through this. I wish I could have spared you this pain. Where is she now?" I told her she needed to tell you the truth or I would. "She's probably upstairs packing, or sitting in your bedroom trying to figure out her next move." He laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that had nothing to do with humor. "You know what the worst part is? I believed everything. Every business trip, every sick aunt, every time she said she loved me, every plan we made for the future. I believed all of it. I trusted her completely. That's not a weakness, Daniel. That's what good people do. They trust. They believe in the goodness of others. She's the one who twisted that trust into something ugly, who took your love and used it for her own purposes. That's her failure, not yours." We sat there in silence for a long time. Outside, I could hear car doors closing, engines starting, the party dissolving into the night like it had never happened. Tom came in once, squeezed Daniel's shoulder without saying anything, and left quietly. The house gradually emptied until it was just us and the wreckage of what had been Daniel's life. Eventually, Vanessa came back downstairs, her eyes red from crying, her perfect makeup ruined and streaked. She'd changed into casual clothes and had a large suitcase with her. She looked smaller somehow, diminished, the confident mask finally stripped away to reveal the frightened woman underneath. "I'll get my things tomorrow," she said quietly, not looking at either of us. "With my lawyer present." "No," Daniel said, standing up. His voice was steady now, cold in a way I'd never heard before. "You'll get your things tomorrow with a witness, and you'll take only what you brought into this marriage. Everything else stays here. Every gift I gave you, every piece of jewelry, everything I purchased, it all stays. You're not taking anything more from me, Vanessa." "Daniel, please, if we could just talk," she started, her voice breaking. "Get out," he said, and the finality in his voice left no room for argument. "Just get out of my house. Now." She left, and the door closing behind her echoed through the house like the end of something. The air felt immediately lighter, as if something poisonous had been extracted, as if we could finally breathe again. Daniel and I sat there until dawn, sometimes talking, sometimes just sitting in silence. I told him everything, the whole story from beginning to end. About finding the wedding photo in the trash, about following Vanessa, about hiring Marcus, about every detail of the investigation. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You know," he said finally as the first light started creeping through the windows, "I used to think you were just being overprotective. After everything that happened with Claire, I thought you couldn't accept that I'd moved on, that I'd found someone new. I actually defended Vanessa to you in my head, told myself you just needed time to accept her." "I know," I said softly. "That's why I had to wait, had to have absolute proof. Otherwise, you would have thought I was just a bitter mother-in-law trying to sabotage your happiness. She would have convinced you I was the problem, and you would have chosen her over me. I couldn't let that happen without being absolutely certain. You saved me, Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "If you hadn't found out, if you hadn't followed her, if you hadn't cared enough to do something that probably made you uncomfortable, she was going to wait until my partnership came through, wasn't she? Then she probably would have divorced me and taken half of everything I've worked for my entire life. Maybe. Or maybe she would have stayed married to you and just kept Trevor on the side forever, having her cake and eating it too. I honestly don't know which would have been worse. The divorce took 4 months, and they were 4 of the hardest months of Daniel's life. Vanessa tried to fight it at first, hiring an expensive lawyer and claiming that the marriage could be saved, that she'd made a terrible mistake but still loved Daniel, that she'd go to therapy, do whatever it took. But Marcus's evidence was airtight, completely undeniable, and eventually her lawyer advised her to accept a clean break with minimal assets. Daniel's lawyer, a sharp woman named Elizabeth Crane who didn't suffer fools, made sure Vanessa left the marriage with exactly what she'd brought into it. Nothing but her clothes and her precious collection of expensive shoes. Elizabeth had been brilliant, ruthless in the best way, protecting Daniel's interests with the ferocity of a mother bear. Trevor Hastings, it turned out, was also married. His wife Sarah found out about Vanessa shortly after everything exploded. Someone, Marcus suspected one of Vanessa's now former friends, had sent her an anonymous email with photos from Marcus's investigation. That marriage didn't survive either. I felt a little bad about that, about another woman being hurt by these revelations, but not too bad. If someone builds a relationship on lies and betrayal, they should probably expect it to collapse eventually. The hardest part was watching Daniel rebuild himself. He threw himself into his work, accepting every extra shift, volunteering for complicated surgeries, avoiding the house where he'd built his life with Vanessa. He lost weight, dropped maybe 15 pounds, his face becoming gaunt and tired. He stopped returning calls from friends, withdrew from social activities, and I worried that the betrayal had damaged something fundamental in him, broken some essential piece of his ability to trust. But slowly, so slowly I almost didn't notice it happening, he started to heal. He sold the house where he'd lived with Vanessa, unable to be in a space that held so many memories of lies. He bought a smaller place closer to the hospital, a cozy townhouse that he decorated himself, putting up photos of his family, of his childhood, of Robert and me. He was reclaiming his identity, rebuilding the parts of himself that Vanessa had tried to erase. He reconnected with old friends, the ones Vanessa had gradually cut him off from. Tom started coming by for beers again. Mark, the divorced friend Vanessa had discouraged, became a regular fixture, the two of them bonding over shared experiences of betrayal and recovery. His college roommate flew in for a visit, and they spent a weekend fishing and catching up, and Daniel came home looking lighter than I'd seen him in months. He started seeing a therapist, Dr. Patricia Nguyen, a woman who specialized in betrayal trauma and rebuilding after infidelity. He went every week, working through the pain and the humiliation and the anger and the questions that probably had no answers. He learned to separate what had happened from his own self-worth, to understand that Vanessa's choices were about her character, not his value. And he started coming to Sunday dinner again, like he used to before Vanessa decided we weren't worth his time. Every week, regular as clockwork, he'd show up at my door with flowers or wine or just his smile, and we'd sit together and eat pot roast and talk about everything and nothing. Sometimes Sarah would join us, flying in from Seattle where she lived with her family, and we'd be together like we used to be before Vanessa, before Claire, before any of the complications that come with adult life. One Sunday, about 8 months after the divorce was finalized, Daniel showed up with something in his hand. It was wrapped in tissue paper, and he handed it to me with a shy smile that reminded me so much of the boy he'd been. "I found this while I was packing up some boxes from storage," he said. "I thought you might want it back." I unwrapped it and found my wedding photo, the one Vanessa had thrown away. Daniel had had it professionally restored by someone who specialized in photo conservation. The glass was replaced, the frame repolished, the coffee stains carefully removed. Robert and I smiled out from behind the clean glass, young and hopeful and so completely unaware of everything that would come. It looked better than it had originally, like the damage had somehow made it more precious. "I thought you might want this back in your home," Daniel said softly. "And Mom? Thank you. For seeing what I couldn't see. For being brave enough to show me the truth even when you knew it would hurt me. Even when you knew I might be angry with you. Not every mother would have done that. Most would have stayed quiet, afraid of causing conflict or losing their relationship with their son." I held that photo, feeling the weight of it, the history it represented. "Your father would have been proud of you," I told him, tears blurring my vision. "For how you handled this, for how you're rebuilding, for choosing to heal instead of becoming bitter. He always said the measure of a man isn't whether he gets knocked down, but whether he gets back up and keeps moving forward. I learned that from watching him. And you." He smiled, and it was the first real smile I'd seen from him in almost a year, genuine and warm and reaching his eyes. "You know what Vanessa's friends have been telling people?" Ashley and Morgan, the ones who were at the party. They've been saying that you're a jealous mother-in-law who couldn't let go, who sabotaged her marriage out of spite because you wanted Daniel all to yourself. People will always find a way to make themselves the victim, I said, not surprised at all. I don't care what Vanessa's friends think of me. Their opinion doesn't pay my bills or keep me up at night. I care that you're free from someone who was using you, that you have the chance to build a real life with someone who actually loves you. She reached out to me last month, he said casually, taking a sip of the coffee I'd poured him. Sent me an email from a new address since I'd blocked her old one. Said she'd made a terrible mistake, that she wanted to try again, that she'd do anything, therapy, counseling, whatever it took to prove she'd changed. My heart clenched. And what did you do? I blocked the new address without responding. I'm done looking backward, Mom. I'm only interested in moving forward now. There's nothing back there for me except pain and lies, and I deserve better than that. That's when I truly knew that he was going to be okay. A year and a half after the divorce, Daniel started dating again. Her name was Rachel Martinez, and she was a pediatric nurse at his hospital. They'd known each other professionally for years, but had never really talked beyond work-related conversations. Then one day in the cafeteria, she'd sat down at his table and asked how he was really doing, and they'd talked for 2 hours straight. The first time he brought her to Sunday dinner, I knew she was different from the moment she walked through my door. She wasn't polished like Vanessa had been. Her clothes were nice but not designer, practical but pretty. Her hair was natural, no expensive highlights, just dark and shiny and pulled back in a simple ponytail. She had laugh lines around her eyes and a genuine warmth that you couldn't fake. She brought flowers, not expensive roses from some upscale florist, but cheerful daisies and sunflowers from the farmer's market downtown. Daniel mentioned you like bright colors, she said, handing them to me with a smile that lit up her whole face. I hope these work. Over dinner, she asked about Robert, looking at photos and wanting to know real stories about him. Not polite, surface-level questions, but genuine curiosity about who he was, what he loved, what made him laugh. She laughed at Daniel's terrible dad jokes, the ones Vanessa had always rolled her eyes at, and helped me clear the table without being asked, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And when she saw my wedding photo, now hanging in a place of honor in my living room, she stopped and touched the frame gently. You can see how much you loved each other, she said softly. It's in the way you're looking at each other, not at the camera. Like nothing else in the world mattered but the two of you in that moment. I hope Daniel and I can build even half of what you two had. I caught Daniel's eye across the room, and we shared a look of complete understanding. This was what real looked like. This was what choosing someone for the right reasons looked like. This was genuine connection, not calculated strategy. They dated for a year before Daniel proposed. He did it simply, at the park where they'd had their first real date, with a ring that was beautiful but not ostentatious. Rachel said yes before he even finished asking the question, and when he called to tell me, I could hear the joy in his voice, the real, uncomplicated happiness that had been missing for so long. They got engaged 6 months ago, and the wedding is planned for next spring in the same small Baptist church where Robert and I got married. When Daniel told me he'd been worried I might think it was too soon, that I might have concerns about him rushing into another marriage. But I'd seen them together, seen the way they were with each other, and I knew this was different. Rachel asked me to help her choose flowers, and we spent a lovely Saturday afternoon at 3 different florists, talking about everything and nothing. At one point, while we were looking at rose samples, she said something that made me tear up right there in the shop. Margaret, I know you had a difficult relationship with Daniel's ex-wife, she said carefully, her voice kind but direct. And I want you to know that I understand how important you are in his life. You raised him, shaped him, loved him through all the difficult times. I'm not here to replace anyone or push anyone out, or make you feel like you're less important now that I'm in the picture. I'm here to add to his family, not subtract from it. I want you in our life, in our children's lives if we're blessed with them. You're not losing a son. I'm gaining a mother if you'll have me. I hugged her right there in the flower shop, not caring that we were making a scene or that the florist was watching with tears in her own eyes. You have no idea how much that means to me. I told her, my voice thick with emotion. How much I needed to hear that. I think I do, she said, hugging me back. Daniel told me what happened, what Vanessa did, what you did to protect him. It couldn't have been easy, Putting yourself in that position, knowing people might judge you or misunderstand your motives, but you did it anyway because you love him. That's the kind of mother I hope to be someday, the kind of woman I want to be. Someone who does what's right even when it's hard. Looking back now, almost 2 years after that birthday party that changed everything, I sometimes wonder if I did the right thing. There are people, Vanessa's friends and probably some of Daniel's colleagues who don't know the full story, who would say I overstepped, that I was a meddling mother-in-law who couldn't accept that her son had moved on, that his marriage wasn't my business or my place to interfere with. Maybe they're right. Maybe I crossed a line that mothers aren't supposed to cross. But then I remember that wedding photo in the trash, covered in garbage, treated like it was worth nothing. I remember the cold calculation in Vanessa's eyes when she thought no one was watching, the way she touched Trevor in that parking lot, the systematic way she was using my son for her own benefit. I remember Daniel's broken voice when he realized his entire marriage had been a lie, and the slow, painful process of watching him rebuild himself from the pieces. And I know with absolute certainty that I did exactly what I needed to do. Because family isn't just about blood or marriage certificates or DNA. It's about showing up when things get hard. It's about having difficult conversations that no one else wants to have, about doing uncomfortable things because someone you love needs you to. It's about protecting the people you love, even when it costs you something, even when it makes you unpopular, even when it means people might judge you or misunderstand your motives. My wedding photo sits on my mantle now, restored and honored, proof that real love exists and endures. Every time I look at it, I see Robert's young face and remember the promises we made to each other on that October morning in 1972. To love, to cherish, to protect, to honor in sickness and health, for richer or poorer till death do us part. Those promises extended beyond just the two of us. They extended to the family we built, to the children we raised, to the legacy we wanted to leave behind, to the values we tried to instill in every interaction and every choice. Vanessa thought she could throw that away, thought 53 years of love and commitment could be erased as easily as taking out the trash. But some things are built to last. Some promises echo across generations. Some loves are strong enough to reach from beyond the grave and protect the ones left behind. I kept my promise to Robert. I protected our son. And in doing so, I learned something profound about love and loyalty. Silence might keep the peace temporarily, but truth sets you free permanently. Comfort is nice, but integrity is essential. Being liked is pleasant, but being respected is crucial. Daniel calls me every Sunday now, not out of obligation or guilt, but because he wants to. Because we have a relationship built on honesty and trust, and the knowledge that we'll always tell each other the truth, even when it hurts. He and Rachel come for dinner at least twice a month, and we've started a new tradition of watching old family movies together. The ones from when Daniel and Sarah were young, running around the backyard, covered in mud and joy. Rachel laughs at Daniel's terrible childhood haircuts and asks questions about the people in the videos, genuinely interested in understanding where Daniel came from, what shaped him, what made him who he is. She wants to know about Robert, about our marriage, about the good times and the hard times and everything in between. She's building a foundation of understanding, learning about the family she's marrying into, respecting the history that came before her. Last week she asked if she could call me Mom, and I cried happy tears for the first time in years. Real tears, not the sad ones I'd shed so many times since Robert died, but tears of joy and hope and gratitude that Daniel had found someone genuine, someone real, someone who saw him for who he truly was and loved him anyway. The other day I ran into Vanessa at the grocery store. It was completely by chance. I was picking up ingredients for Sunday dinner, and she was in the produce section, looking at vegetables with the kind of concentration people use when they're avoiding thinking about something else. She looked tired, older somehow, though only a couple of years had passed. There were lines around her mouth that hadn't been there before, and her clothes, while still expensive, weren't as meticulously coordinated as they used to be. She was alone, pushing a cart that contained wine, frozen dinners for one, and a wilted salad that looked like it had been sitting in the refrigerated section too long. When our eyes met, I saw something flicker across her face. Regret, maybe. Or anger that her carefully laid plans hadn't worked out. Or just the exhausted recognition of someone who'd gambled and lost. She opened her mouth as if to say something, maybe to defend herself or attack me or explain in some way that would make sense of everything that had happened. Then she closed it again, seeming to realize that there was nothing to say, no words that would change anything or undo what she'd done. She walked away, her heels clicking on the linoleum floor, and I watched her go, feeling nothing but a distant kind of pity. She'd had a chance at something real, at a good man who would have loved her genuinely if she'd let him, if she'd been honest about who she was and what she wanted. But she'd chosen calculation over connection, strategy over sincerity, profit over partnership. She'd seen Daniel as a means to an end, a stepping stone to the life she felt entitled to, and in doing so she'd lost the chance at actual happiness. In the end, we all make choices, and those choices define us more than our intentions or our explanations ever could. Vanessa chose Trevor and manipulation and a plan that ultimately backfired spectacularly. I chose truth and confrontation and protecting my son. Consequences be damned, reputation be damned, relationships be damned. Daniel chose to believe in love again, to trust again, to open his heart again even after being burned so badly. And Rachel chose him, knowing his history, knowing his scars, knowing the damage that had been done, choosing to love him anyway, to help him heal, to build something new and real and lasting. I think about my wedding photo sometimes, about that young woman standing on those church steps in her borrowed dress with her garden flowers. She had no idea what was coming. The struggles and the joys, the losses and the victories, the moments of doubt and the moments of absolute certainty, the times when love felt easy and the times when it was the hardest thing in the world. She didn't know she'd spend 53 years with the man standing beside her in that photo, or that she'd have to protect their legacy long after he was gone, or that she'd one day have to make impossible choices between peace and truth. But she made a promise that day, standing in front of God and family and friends, and I kept it. Even when it was hard. Even when it made me unpopular. Even when it meant confronting someone who could have made my life very difficult if she'd chosen to fight back harder. Even when it meant people might judge me or call me bitter or say I'd overstepped my bounds. Because that's what love does. It protects. It defends. It stands up when it would be easier to sit down. It speaks when it would be more comfortable to stay silent. It acts when inaction would be more convenient. It fights for what matters, even when the battle is ugly or unpopular or misunderstood. Did I throw Vanessa's secret in her face? Yes, I absolutely did. And I'd do it again in a heartbeat without a moment's hesitation. Because some secrets deserve to be exposed, especially when they're being used to hurt someone you love. There's a fundamental difference between privacy and deception, between keeping your own counsel and living a lie that damages others, between having personal boundaries and systematically manipulating someone who trusts you. Vanessa had every right to her privacy, to her personal life, to her choices about who she loved and how she lived. But she gave up that right the moment she chose to deceive my son, to use him as a meal ticket while maintaining a whole separate relationship with another man, to plan her exit strategy while pretending to build a life with Daniel. She gave up that right when she threw away the symbol of what real commitment looks like because it made her uncomfortable to be reminded that actual love exists, that some people actually mean their vows, that marriage can be more than a business transaction. So yes, I exposed her. I threw her secret in her face in front of her friends and the life she'd carefully constructed. I didn't do it out of spite or jealousy or bitterness, though I'm sure that's what she tells herself and what her friends believe. I did it because my son deserved the truth, because he deserved the chance to make informed choices about his life, because he deserved better than to be used and discarded when he was no longer useful. And I'm not sorry. Not even a little bit. If you like this story, hit the like button, and don't forget to subscribe to get more stories from me. But more importantly, if you've ever been in a situation where you had to choose between keeping the peace and speaking the truth, I want you to know something crucial. It's okay to choose truth. It's okay to prioritize honesty over harmony when someone you love is being hurt. It's okay to protect the people you love, even when others judge you for it, even when it costs you relationships or reputation or the approval of people who don't know the full story. It's okay to stand up for what's right, even when it costs you something precious. Because in the end, we're all just trying to protect what matters. We're all just trying to honor the promises we've made and the people who made us who we are. We're all just trying to live with integrity in a world that often rewards the opposite. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to let a lie continue, no matter how comfortable it might be for everyone involved, no matter how much easier it would be to just look the other way. Would you have done what I did? Would you have followed her? Gathered evidence? Hired a private investigator? Confronted her at your son's birthday party in front of guests? Or would you have stayed silent, hoping your child would figure it out on their own, not wanting to interfere or be seen as meddling? Would you have told yourself it wasn't your place, that you should stay out of it, that adult children need to make their own mistakes? Tell me in the comments. I genuinely love to know your thoughts, your perspective, your own stories of times when you had to choose between comfort and truth. Just remember this, and please take it to heart. You're never too old to fight for what's right. You're never too old to stand up for the people you love, to be their advocate when they can't see clearly themselves. You're never too old to protect your family, to honor the values you've tried to live by, to make sure that your family's story, the real story, the one built on genuine love and sacrifice and commitment, gets honored the way it deserves. Age doesn't diminish your responsibility to the people you love. It doesn't mean you should sit quietly while terrible things happen. It doesn't mean your voice matters less, or your insights are less valuable, or your protective instincts should be ignored. If anything, age gives you perspective, wisdom, the ability to see patterns and recognize danger that younger people might miss. My wedding photo is back where it belongs, in a place of honor where everyone who enters my home can see it. My son is healing, thriving, even building a life with someone who truly loves him, someone who sees him as a person rather than an investment. And I sleep peacefully at night, knowing I did what Robert would have wanted me to do, what any parent who truly loves their child would do. I protected our family. I stood up. I spoke out. I fought for truth even when it would have been easier to stay silent. That's all any of us can do in the end, really. Love fiercely. Protect boldly. Speak honestly. Act courageously. And never ever throw away what's sacred. Whether that's a photo representing 53 years of marriage, or the truth that sets people free, or the courage to do what's right even when it's hard. The legacy we leave isn't just in the good times or the easy choices. It's in the moments when we choose truth over comfort, when we choose to act rather than merely sympathize, when we choose to protect rather than merely observe. It's in the hard conversations and the difficult stands and the times when we risk everything for what matters most. Robert and I made promises to each other on that October morning in 1972. We promised to love and cherish each other, yes, but we also promised to build something lasting, something real, something worth protecting. That promise extended to our children, to the family we created, to the values we tried to instill. When I confronted Vanessa, I was keeping that promise. When I protected Daniel, I was honoring Robert's memory and the life we built together. And now, watching Daniel and Rachel build their own life, their own love story, their own promises, I know it was worth it. Every uncomfortable moment, every judgment, every person who thinks I overstepped, it was all worth it to see my son happy and free, and loved by someone genuine. That's what family means. That's what love requires. That's what we owe the people who matter most. With love and respect, Auntie Helen Stories.